Oh, we have DPAK versus Knowles. Okay, cool. Because I think it is very important to understand how the conversation that they had before impacted the way that they had this one. So David is really hard, in my opinion, on Knowles. Whether you think it's justified or not, David is really hard on Knowles in this conversation. And I think this is part of the reason why Knowles is harder on him and is more prepared when they talk the next time. So I want to look at this one first because I felt like it helped me understand the first one more.
I am worried sometimes that we are not giving the best argument for the other side, or that we simply don't understand what the other side is saying. So in the interest of actually hearing out the other side, I'm very pleased to bring on David Pakman, who is the host of The David Pakman Show. It's a nationally syndicated progressive TV show and radio show. I'm always really grateful to progressives who come on this show. We invite lots of them on. Very often they say no. Sometimes they come on. So just to make sure we're not straw manning anything, let's bring on David. David, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a unique pleasure to be here, Michael. Thank you.
So, David, you saw the clip. You've been watching the Ketanji Jackson hearings. Am I crazy, or should a twice Harvard-educated nominee, federal judge, nominee for the Supreme Court, who is a woman, be able to define what a woman is?
I can't say if you're crazy. That would be for a mental health professional.
For my doctor.
You're either dishonest or ignorant, and we can maybe figure out which. So
David Pakman jumps on here. He's already like pretty rude, whether you agree with him or not. He's pretty rude. And this kind of sets the tone for the entire conversation here. And I will keep repeating that note, whether you agree with him or not, whether we're pro-David or anti-David, or pro his position or anti his position, or we believe what he's saying or not. He's coming on somebody else's show. He's being rude off the bat. And this is going to set the tone for the conversation. And he's going to continue doing this.
We're just meeting each other. I'm sort of kidding around. But here's the deal. There are no instances where, when issues come before the Supreme Court, it comes down to the dictionary definition of a word. When it comes to who counts as a woman, or what is discrimination, or what is negligence, it's always in very narrow circumstances where dictionary definitions do almost nothing for you. So she was very smart not to play into these kind of rhetorical black holes, because whatever definition she gives, Michael, she then is going to be pushed into some corner with some case or article or book she hasn't read, by the way, and there's no upside to it. So if we're just having a good faith conversation about strategy, she did the right thing. Almost 60% of Americans believe she's qualified, and she is. And that's really all there is to it. It's kind of boring.
Well, I agree with her. I don't agree with you that it's boring. I think it's one of the most interesting questions in the country, that we're now at a point where we can no longer even define man or woman. But I do agree with you on strategy. She's in a very tough spot because her side of the aisle, and she's relatively leftist, even by the standards of the Democratic Party. So on her side of the aisle, there is a new definition of woman. Well, they haven't given the definition of woman, but it's not the old definition of woman, which is a person who's not a man. That is out because of the transgender movement. And so she knows that if she gives this new definition, which is a woman is, I don't know, a woman is someone who says that he or she is a woman, that's going to alienate, I think, the vast majority of Americans. If she gives the old definition that a woman is a female human being, and a female is of or denoting the sex that can bear children and reproduce and produce eggs, for instance, she knows that that will alienate her base, and she knows that that now is apparently controversial in the law after the Bostock decision, after other transgender decisions. So I understand the strategy, but what about the law? What about the definition? You say she shouldn't be quoting the dictionary. Well, fine. Shouldn't she at least be able to give the legal definition of a woman? Shouldn't she, a woman, have some sense of what that is? I'm not a meteorologist. I can tell you if it's raining.
Yeah, there is no legal definition of a woman, and that's exactly the point. The point here is when it comes to the court is in a position, or will be in a position, or might be in a position to decide for the purposes of a particular set of facts based on a claim brought by someone who appeals a case about these issues. And so it's literally irrelevant to her job as a Supreme Court justice.
So one thing that David will do later is appeal to ignorance of the law or ignorance of the way that the legal system works and use that to get out of having deeper conversations about things. But my problem is that he makes very definite claims about the way that things work, about whether or not something would be relevant without having that experience. And I feel like it's difficult to do one but not the other, and still, be true to what he's saying about not being experienced, therefore not able to comment on it. But we'll get to that.
Again, we can have a cultural discussion outside of the context of the Supreme Court. In the Senate's job in evaluating, is she qualified? It's an irrelevant question, and by her qualifications, she's more qualified than any of the 9 justices currently on the court. There's no way to deny that.
I think you can, because I think all of the 9 justices on the court can tell you what a woman is. And so I know we're getting back,
because they've never been asked to do that. No, nobody's ever been asked to define words in this way during hearings. So you could speculate that, but they've never been asked. So
they've never been asked.
Impossible.
I agree, say that. I've never, but I, as a gambling man, I would bet the farm that Justice Alito could tell you what a woman is. But you're right; they've never been asked because it's never been controversial before. But I want to get to a point you just made. You said there's no legal definition of a woman, but there must be, because there are legal protections specifically for women. So if we don't know what a woman is,
then Title III thing
and Title IX, and Title IX.
So he just says this vaguely. Once he starts to bring up Title IX, he says, now we're going to have a Title IX conversation. As a viewer who watches mostly, listens to a lot of NPR, listens to a lot of the daily news podcasts in my podcast feed, and listens to I'm Really Important, MSNBC, and Fox, I don't really understand what David is even referring to here. I don't know what this Title IX conversation thing is. I may be out of the loop right now, but... So this vague appeal to Title IX conversations generally being bad faith or whatever, I don't understand it. It's uber dismissive, and it doesn't really ring for me. And it's trying to shut down a conversation without even giving a good explanation of why.
And Title IX is quite controversial.
A good faith conversation, or one that's in some way productive,
You're saying you and I, or you're saying Ketanji Jackson?
You and I, yeah. I don't know if, listen, the Republican senators obviously didn't want to have a good faith conversation. I was talking about you and I, Michael.
Yes, well, I do want to. This is why I'm granting you you're making the point on political strategy. I totally grant you that. That was the right move for her to make.
And really good for him here. He's opened up the entire show by saying he wants to bring on other people, so he's not an echo chamber, which, it could be, as worthless as the wind that comes out of his mouth, depending on how he has the conversation, right? But he says that here he's trying to have a discussion about this. He gives a concession about the previous point that David brought up to encourage a discussion, to show that he's being good faith, when David is assuming right off the bat that he's not going to be good faith, which is by definition bad faith. So if they're not able to have a good faith discussion about this, it is because of the immediacy of David's bad faith about the conversation. He immediately just doesn't believe that they could have a productive conversation about the thing. And that is the seed from which this bad faith conversation is born. Not from him. He's fine at the beginning of this. He's going to fall apart towards the end, but he doesn't begin that way.
And
if she wants to avoid
relevance.
But then bring up Title IX. There are legal protections for women. This is coming before the court. It's come before the court in the last term. There are going to be a lot more cases coming before the court coming up. It seems extraordinarily relevant that we know what this woman thinks of these issues and of a basic question of biology and human nature. What is a woman?
And he makes a good case for why it's important. It's happened in the last term. It's likely to come up again. Abortion, of course, which is the tangential topic to this, where the womanhood thing might be important.
Really relevant that we know what this woman thinks of these issues and of a basic question of biology and human nature. What is a woman? I don't think that's a bad faith question for the senators or for me to ask.
No, it's not necessarily bad faith, but we have to be able to, what I hope are reasonable people, Michael, understand that in the context of her role as a Supreme Court justice, it doesn't come down to a biological opinion. Like, is that?
I mean, I don't think that's a bad faith question for the senators or for me to ask.
No, it's not necessarily bad faith, but we have to be able to, what I hope are reasonable people, Michael, understand that in the context of her role as a Supreme Court justice, it doesn't come down to a biological opinion. Like, can you at least grant that piece? Well, that it's true that for what the Supreme Court decides, these are narrow issues where when it comes to Obamacare's constitutionality, which Amy Coney Barrett never, refused to weigh in on, or with all of these things, these are really narrow legal decisions, and there is no way in which a dictionary definition of terms does anything for us.
Well, it might do something, but I grant your point a little bit, except that Marcia Blackburn didn't ask for the biological definition or the dictionary definition. That's what Ketanji Jackson added. She said, I'm not a biologist. But all Marcia Blackburn asked was, just tell me what a woman is from a legal perspective, a constitutional perspective, a philosophical, I mean, whatever. That's
literally not what Marcia Blackburn said. I would encourage you to pull the clip and identify the time at which she said.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist.
The meaning of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide. Well, so I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
Let's break this down. So she doesn't say a legal definition, a this definition, that definition, some kind of, obviously he's adding that on. The spirit of what he's saying is okay. The specifics there are not, but here is something where I think that David's bad faith in this conversation turns what could have been a nothing burger into a big problem. So let's go ahead and listen to this one more time.
But I grant your point a little bit, except that Marcia Blackburn didn't ask for the biological definition or the dictionary definition. That's what Ketanji Jackson added.
Right. So she adds the biological definition.
She said, I'm not a biologist. But all Marcia Blackburn asked was, just tell me what a woman is from a legal perspective, a constitutional perspective.
That part is true. This second part is not, right? This second part is him adding it on. But it doesn't make a huge difference to the way the conversation goes. If I was having a conversation with you, the good faith way of handling this is not to dive down your throat about she didn't say legal definition or this definition or that definition. And if it was really important to me, what I would say is like, well, no, she just asked for a definition, right? She didn't give any other specifics there. She didn't ask for a legal definition. She just said definition. She kept it very broad, right? But the way he handles this he handles it really poorly, in my opinion. Turning it into a claim. Yeah, like, and I have a problem with that because it's totally not necessary. And again, I'm somebody who, like, the tension and the heat of the conversation is something that you need to kind of keep in check. He's doing everything he can to kind of continue to be good faith here, and we just don't get the same from David.
She said she didn't mention biology, and she didn't mention the dictionary. She said, "What's the
But you just asserted that she said she wanted the legal and philosophical. She never said
No, I didn't say that. I said I just said Marcia Blackburn asked for the definition, any sort of definition that Ketanji Jackson could give.
And again here, we have him clarifying what he said. He's clarifying. He's saying, well, no, she didn't ask for this and she didn't ask for that. That slight correction of what he said before is now bringing into clear focus what it was that he was saying. That she didn't ask for anything specific with the definition. She just asked for a definition, and Ketanji Jackson just chose to provide no definition. I see some people in the chat saying that Judge Brown could have used the definition from a legal case or a law or statute. Yeah, she could have answered the question. She had the ability to answer the question. She just did not.
She didn't specify biology.
Now you're backtracking.
I'm not backtracking at all.
That's dishonest now.
I'm not how am I backtracking?
No. Hold on a second. Let's be clear.
And like, now we're being bad faith. he's not backtracking here, and this shit's loaded to say that he's backtracking too. That's not what he's doing. Like, and this just, when I watched this, I was like, I can understand how I would be very upset if I was Knowles going into the next conversation, and how I would handle it way differently, because Pakman is not going to treat me fairly in our conversation with each other.
30 seconds ago, you said Marsha Blackburn didn't ask for the biological; she asked for the legal.
No, I didn't.
Let me finish the sentence.
But that's not what he said, right? And now Pakman is the one lying, because that's not what he said, right? And so this is something I really wanted to highlight, is a breakdown in communication between these two people, because of the bad faith, honest to God, just bad faith approach Pakman is doing here. And to be clear, if you're a Pakman lover out there and you're like, wow, I can't believe Booksmarts hates Pakman, I like Pakman. I like the way that he handles coverage. I like that oftentimes he stays calm. I think he's a good debater when he's prepped for it. Like, I don't have any personal problems with Pakman. It's just undeniable in this exchange and conversation that he's being bad faith, and that a lot of the problems in this conversation fall on him and not on Knowles, right?
You're misrepresenting what I said.
No, I'm not. I would encourage the audience to rewind.
I would encourage that. I would encourage that as well.
But can I even get it out?
Sure,
Or is
sure.
I mean, it's okay. The problem with what you just did, Michael, is you just said Blackburn asked for the legal definition, and I said, no, she didn't. And you said, no, that's true. She actually just asked for the definition.
I'm sorry. Well, then if either you misheard or it seemed that I misspoke, I'll be very clear.
And you laugh and shit, but you did. You misheard. Like, you misheard. So, like, it can be a bit dickish to put the misheard first and to say, well, either you misheard or I misspoke. It kind of hurts the point of that message that Knowles is trying to get across. But straight up, you did mishear, right? Like, I don't know.
Marsha Blackburn just said, what's the definition of a woman? She didn't specify anything else. Now, you then said that biology has no place here, or that the dictionary definition has no place. But that's not what Marsha Blackburn asked for. She just asked a simple question.
Understand that in these Supreme Court hearings, the senators can ask the questions however they want, and the nominees can answer them however they want.
Or not answer them.
My opinion is, this is my opinion, and you can have a different one, and that's the great thing about America, Michael. My opinion is that if you're interviewing for the job of Supreme Court Justice, it's reasonable to assume the questions have a legal bearing as to your role on the court. Given that, Judge Jackson was right to understand the point of the question is to back her into a rhetorical corner about legal definitions. And she was right to say, it's not something I can answer. These are narrow issues when they come before the court, and there's no reason that she would ask such a question. Do you know this guy, Jesse Lee Peterson? Have you heard of him?
I know Jesse Lee Peterson,
When I was on with Jesse, he said to me, David, define what love is and what a man is. And it's a really common rhetorical technique for the bad faith right to start with just pick a word and define it and use it to back someone into a rhetorical corner. It's a waste of time, Michael. Let's talk about real issues, please.
Okay. Well, I think that as a philosophical issue, but certainly as a legal issue too, the definition of a woman does matter, has mattered recently, and will matter soon. But I at least agree with you on the strategy. You have not convinced me of Judge Jackson's good faith confirmation hearing, but you have convinced me that she is a wise politician and that she is playing her hand the best that she can. Before I let you go, David, I know we're like way over. I am really not playing the game of giving you some impossible thing to define. But since the question of woman is up in the air, everyone's arguing over what it means these days, do you have, either you yourself or you speaking for the progressives, do you have a working definition that you would use?
Now, I think that this is a mistake from Knowles. He has prepped that he wants to answer this question. He is making the decision, even though they're over time, to continue to ask it because he did prep it and he wants it. Pakman has already given a whole explanation of why he thinks it's a bad question. It's bad faith. It's not real politics, yada, yada. I'm surprised that Knowles continued to ask this. I think that this is a misstep, but let's see how it plays out.
No, I don't do, like I told Jesse Lee Peterson, and there's so many, this interview is feeling a lot like that one, interestingly enough.
Jesus. And again, how rude, honestly. Like, I don't know, to compare this Knowles guy to Jesse Lee Peterson, I feel like it's really, really rude.
I don't do dictionary, I do politics. And so, no, I don't spend time defining words. And here's in all seriousness, Michael, let's now talk philosophically. Really, we're talking, man to man now. Dictionaries are descriptive, not proscriptive. So
well, they're prescriptive sometimes too. But they can be descriptive. They are descriptive and prescriptive as well, right? The word means this.
By definition, humans decide what to put in the dictionary, right? So they're just these are descriptive.
But they put it there because the words mean something.
At the time, believe.
Yeah, I mean, we could go down a tangent on prescriptivism versus descriptivism, and that might be good for a future appearance.
I don't know if it's a tangent, but
it would be a very good discussion, and I think it would be great to have you back. I truly appreciate your coming on and giving the progressive perspective on this.
Cool. So that's the first one. It goes really bad. I think Pakman is a huge reason why that went bad. Let's go ahead and check out this next one, which is the main focus of today, which is their second appearance that happens a while after in the next month, March, April, May, maybe 2 months later.
I want to make sure that we're not just in an echo chamber here. We're not just talking to ourselves. So I'm bringing on someone who I suspect is more reasonable than Joe Biden. I hope he's more reasonable than Joe Biden. This would be David Pakman. David coming back to the show, nationally syndicated progressive talk show host on TV and radio. David, thank you for coming back to the show.
The first time went so well, I had to come back for seconds.
I knew it. That's why we invited you back. And listen, I was disheartened to see that Joe Biden and Jen Psaki would not condemn the protests at all hours outside of the justices' homes and residential neighborhoods before their families. I suspect, I mean this sincerely, I'm not being facetious at all. I suspect you are more reasonable than the staffers at the White House now. Can we at least agree this is bad? It is bad to protest outside of Supreme Court justices' homes?
Well, so I suspect you want to have a good faith conversation about this. Is that a fair assessment? So we can speak freely here. You're not just looking to play gotcha here.
I'm not. No, I really
okay,
not.
All right,
That's not what we do on the show.
And we have the carefulness of David. Not as bad as the first time where he's just going to straight up say it's going to be a bad faith conversation. But now he's, he's handling it a little bit better.
This is not a protest technique I would employ, right? But I have a large platform online where I'm going to reach way more people than going to anybody's house. So like my personal thing is this is not a protest technique I would employ. Let's go through like legality, morality, ethics, etc.
Yep.
Anything that is a criminal act like a Molotov cocktail, destruction of property, whatever, it should be reported. If there's a crime, people should be charged. If you can get a guilty verdict, they should be, sentenced. Fine. Very, very good.
Yep.
In terms of the speech aspect of this, there's this case from the 90s, Madsen v. Women's Health Center.
One thing I will say, keep this in mind. In the last conversation, I noted David citing law and making pretty big claims about what is and isn't relevant, what is and isn't important in law. And here he is again at the opening of this making a reference to a law. I mention this because the way that David will handle Knowles bringing up laws is very different. And he will again attempt this meta level shutting down the conversation thing.
Which found that it's okay for anti-choice protesters to go and protest outside the homes of just random workers at abortion clinics. Okay, now that's not my opinion. That's a decision that exists.
Yep.
Those are quite literally private citizens. They're just like medical workers, right? So if that's okay and we have a First Amendment, certainly showing up and protesting isn't against the law. Are you and I on the same page about that piece?
No, because in the U.S. Code, 18 U.S. Code Section 1507, the federal law, explicitly prohibits protesting outside of the homes of judges with the intention of influencing their decisions.
And now he will cite a law as well, and he is much more specific. David's law was not about judges. David's law required more thinking, more technical pieces to put together to make an argument for why this one would be okay. His law is specifically about judges, right? So I think that they start off on a very uneven footing in terms of their sources here.
So if
the
they were...
decision has been done, though.
No, it hasn't. The decision hasn't come out. There was a leaked draft of the opinion.
And then falters here in an incredible fashion. What an incredible misstep. I have to imagine that he was frustrated and jumped the gun on saying something that if I got David in a room, just me and him, and he was calm, he wouldn't say that, right? Because he knows that it's a leaked brief. He didn't need Knowles to educate him on that. And this hand slap from Knowles very quickly, the dismissal, you know, that's got to sting. And now David, I think, is going to be put off even more here. And let's see how this continues. So already 2 back-to-back failures for Pakman in this conversation.
So I would agree with you. It's not clear that they were in violation of the law if the decision had already come out and they were just expressing their anger. But because the decision has not come out, because it seems clear to me that the protesters are trying to change the course of how this decision is going to come and try to bring political pressure, to me it seems quite clear this is a violation of federal law.
No lawyer I've spoken to says that this is against any law unless some specific, you know, if even something as relatively benign as a noise ordinance, let's say there's a noise ordinance that starts at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
If it's 11 and you're being loud, okay, now we have something to talk about. But that's
not the law that
lawyer who says there's any law being broken here.
That is the law. I mean, the viewers are free to go check it out, but that is a very specific law. There's actually a Virginia statute too, but I'm just talking about the federal law.
It's so tough because he is citing a specific law. David is citing, I've talked to lawyers who have said, like, if we're borrowing some of, and you may be upset with me about this, legal terminology or whatever that's been popular, like from the Amber Heard case, David is referring to hearsay, whereas like we're referring to like nuts and bolts things that exist actually with Knowles here. David, I doubt, has prepped anything on the law that Knowles has brought about. So David isn't really going to be able to counter what Knowles says here, which is going to make things difficult for David, of course. And so, you know, all he can do is appeal to lawyers that he's spoken with, but it's not convincing to me as a viewer. And I would hope it's not convincing to the average person who is a discerning viewer watching this, because like, I don't know what lawyers you talk to or if they knew about this or whatever. Different lawyers are good at different things. Like, I don't know about this. You haven't named anybody, you know, like I have nothing I can do here.
Now you might say, well, I don't like that law. I don't think it's just.
I
think it's a violation.
It's applicable here. I just don't think it's applicable at the homes of these individuals in Virginia, based on lawyers I've spoken to. Neither you or I are lawyers, so we may just be.
But I can read the law. I mean,
further.
And then he makes this claim. And he's going to appeal later that we shouldn't be talking about laws. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to have a legal conversation. But here he is making claims about this without even knowing the law. Knowles could have made this up. But he's interpreting a law that he didn't know probably until this conversation started even existed.
The statute is plain. Are you saying that you don't think that the protesters are seeking to influence the decision?
I haven't spoken to them, so I really can't say.
And like every dodge Pakman has here looks so bad. Like, look at Knowles. He's being served up W's on a platter in this conversation. And the minimal amount of prep that he's done into this legal statute has just done so much work for him in this conversation. It's an incredible loss for David here.
You can hear the sort of things that they're chanting. They're not saying.
I actually have not heard what they're chanting. I haven't. Okay. I don't know what are they chanting? You tell me.
And like these appeals to ignorance, David does them a lot on his show. And it's one thing that I think is to borrow something from him in the last conversation, strategically advantageous, right? Maybe politically advantageous, but it's not advantageous to him as an authority on anything. Are you telling me that you, David Pakman, the news guy, the progressive news guy who covers all this stuff, you didn't even hear what the protesters were saying? You didn't see a picture of a sign? You have absolutely no idea what the protesters in these stories that you're covering and you're on here to talk about even believe, even purport to believe, even chant, even have on a sign. Like, the appeal to ignorance here, while it may save David from having to defend the protesters or even speak about them, it portrays ignorance that's beyond what I even believe that he lacks information on. So it makes me think that David is lying, first of all. I don't trust that. I don't believe that. I'm going to pull a Mr. Girl here. I don't believe that he believes that. And secondly, if it is the truth, what is David Pakman doing? Like, with his news show, then how do you not know this, right? So whichever way you take it, whether you believe him or not, it doesn't help him here. It doesn't help him beyond the 5 seconds after this where he's trying to avoid talking about it, right? So it's a very short-sighted way of avoiding the conversation. I don't think it works out well for David.
They're chanting "My body, my choice." They're chanting,
"My body, my choice" isn't change the decision.
Of course it is.
That's just their opinion, right? My body, my choice.
And then he says this. What are we doing, David? Why would you be protesting outside of a Supreme Court justice's home immediately following the leak of this Roe v. Wade thing, chanting "My body, my choice," bruh? It's just so bad, dude. It's a fucking disaster.
They're chanting in support of the ruling that will be overruled by the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case.
Listen, I think that if we want to get into the minutia of this at the legal level, I think you would have a hard time arguing that legally saying "my body, my choice" is equivalent to saying "change your decision."
And he makes another legal argument. But he's opposed to it because they're not lawyers. So where does the strength of this statement come from? Where does the expertise necessary to make this statement come from? Again, on a law that David probably didn't know about until they had this conversation, right? Like, it's just so bad from David here, man.
What would they be doing outside of the justices' homes before a decision comes out, after a leaked opinion?
Expressing their opinion. I mean, listen, legally, I don't think you're going to win on that. I don't think you're going to win on legally they were breaking the law because they said "my body, my choice." It seems very weak.
No, David, they're not merely saying "my body, my choice," and they're not merely posting some opinion online. They're going to the homes of these people. Actually, the group that sent them, it's called Ruth Sent Us, they said that this is an unacceptable attack on women and LGBT, and we need to force them, right? That was the key word. We need to force them to change their views using a diversity of tactics. And we would acknowledge that peaceful protesting is just one tactic, so it seems like they're calling for other things. But even that word force, what does that word force?
Michael, now you're blending, now you're saying, well, they've used peaceful protesting, but they're calling for other things.
No, but
so they've broken.
That isn't my problem. No, I mean, I think that is a separate issue. But the very fact that the organization that sent, I'm sorry.
But you introduced it in this conversation.
That's a problem as well, that they're calling for a diversity of tactics.
I can't tell. And somebody mentioned the serfs point. I feel like in this conversation, not in general, because I like Pakman, he says smart things. I think that Pakman in this conversation approaches what we call the serfs point. The point at which I can't tell if the explanation for the behavior on exhibit is because of bad faith, intentional malice, or stupidity. I don't know. It hits a point where I don't know why he's doing this bad. We've entered the twilight zone where it could be that he's dumb. It could be that he's on medication today. It could be he didn't get sleep. It could be he's having an out-of-body experience. I don't know. He's just having a really, really bad, obtuse approach to the conversation here.
The chief problem that we're discussing here is that the organization that is taking responsibility for sending the mobs to the justices' homes says we need to force them to change their minds. We need to force them to not attack women and LGBT and all of the other minority groups that they're discussing. So even the word force would suggest to me that they are attempting to influence the decision and therefore are in violation of this law.
Yeah, I'm not trying to skirt the main point you're trying to make, which I am unsure I can identify, but I haven't seen that specifically said, so it's just hard for me to comment on it.
And he's smug about it. He's smug about like being lost in this conversation. He has no reason to be lost. Knowles has been so clear. And it looks so bad from David here.
You're pleading ignorance on this point.
No, I'm not pleading ignorance. What I can speak to is, if any crime has been committed, charge them.
Okay.
I'm totally with that. I'm totally with that.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Do you think now, from your perspective as a reasonable Democrat, if you were advising Democrats?
I'm not a Democrat. I've never been associated with the Democratic Party.
Really?
And then we enter into another cringe fest. The first statement, not totally cringe in isolation. Associated could mean like formally associated with, right? But let's let it play out.
Are you in any party, or you're just independent?
No. Yeah, I'm just independent.
You would generally vote for Democrats, I would assume.
I vote for more Democrats than Republicans. I don't care about parties, though. I see parties essentially almost like corporations that justify their own existence to just continue existing in opposition to the other party.
And I can believe that while also being a Democrat, mind you. I could think that the party system is this, that, and the other, and still consistently vote Democrat and register as a Democrat as well. So let's bear that in mind as well, right? My ANCAP and communist friends in the chat, you probably also realize that like that meme about you participate in it is very silly and stupid, right? You're still going to be participating in it, and that's going to apply the same with this problem with political parties.
Do you really vote for Republicans?
I voted for many. There's lots of nonpartisan local elections, where I later found out some of the people were not Democrats. But I mean, it's kind of neither here nor there.
So he says more Democrats than Republicans, but then the only thing that comes to mind when he talks about Republicans that he's voted for is a fringe situation in which he voted for somebody that he thought was a Democrat, but they wound up being Republican. So, clearly, not David's best moment here either.
Okay, but you're not formally in the Democrat Party. If you were advising a Democratic candidate.
And he's not even pushing on it. What I also want to note in this is this characterization that Knowles is in these conversations just trying to get gotcha moments and whatever. I don't think we see that from Knowles. I don't think it's a fair characterization of these conversations. He may be like that in other shows. I don't know. I haven't researched it. I didn't do what I did with Jim Jeffries, okay? I don't know if he is a news guy who sucks at being a news guy, the same way Jim Jeffries is a comedian that sucks at being a comedian. I don't know. I don't think he's doing that here.
Would you advise them to continue running on this issue of abortion, on this issue of for instance, the bill that the Democrats last night tried to pass, it failed in the Senate. They said it was to codify Roe versus Wade. It actually went further to create even more abortion protections. Would you advise them to run on this issue in the midterms or to back away from it in the midterms?
So run on it. I think that there's from a political strategy standpoint, there's two options. One would be run on the bill that failed yesterday. That doesn't seem like a good idea to run on that.
Yeah.
I think where there is, based on public opinion about abortion being as in favor of it as ever before during the Roe v. Wade era, public polling is now in the 60–70% of Americans believe abortion should generally be legal in most cases. That's not in every case, but in most cases. Based on that, it seems to me it would be prudent to run on, we need to get the government out of medical decisions between women and doctors. I mean, and again, you and I are never going to agree on something like when does life begin. That's a different.
Well, we might agree on that. I had a gal who came.
Whoa, hold on, but let me at least finish my sentence.
Sure.
Now he's going to be a little bit dickish there. I don't know if that's super necessary, but
you asked me about strategy. It seems to me that since most Americans think abortion should be legal in most cases, the right strategy thing would be, we need to get the federal government out of in the middle of these medical decisions.
But right now, if you let's say that the leaked opinion actually ends up being the final decision. Let's say that Roe v. Wade is overruled instantly, as Elizabeth Warren says, abortion is severely restricted, if not outlawed, in more than half of the states. Instantly, you're in a very different situation. Knowing that there are all sorts of polls. There's polls that show that 94% of Americans reject the absolutist view of abortion held by some Democrats. There are polls, as you cite, that show that when you ask the question, do you support Roe versus Wade broadly, then there is some majority of Americans that broadly want some abortion liberality.
So, Michael, that's very mealy-mouthed. I mean, let's just be honest. Asked the same way, over the last 50 years, support for Roe v. Wade has continued to go up. Fair?
Well, it depends how you ask the question.
And here he fucks up. To be totally fair here with Knowles, this response of it depends on how you ask the question is not thinking about what David had just said. You're not listening very well here. David says they've asked the question the same way over the years, and the responses changed. They didn't change the question over the course of the years of compiling this information. All he wants from Knowles is to admit that when the question is asked in the way that I've already said, over the years, it has increased. Knowles has his own point that he wants to mention about it's going to depend on how you ask the question, or if you ask the question differently, the numbers would be different. But that's separate from what David is trying to get like a sanity check on here, and Knowles is failing the sanity check.
If you ask
the same way over the last 50 years,
if you ask,
it has gone up.
If you ask the question in a way that is, I think, hiding the reality of abortion and is just talking about the decision, Roe versus Wade, then sure, there's broad support for it.
And he continues to go on with this. So I feel like this is a failure on Knowles' part. This isn't Pakman's fault. Pakman has been clear. Pakman has repeated himself. And Knowles continues on with this point. Knowles could say this point if only he were to concede to David the first part. Like, yeah, when they're asking the question this way, it has changed over time. However, I also think that if they were to, and then go ahead and say his thing about changing the questions, right?
But if you ask the question and you say, do you support this type of abortion? Do you support this type of abortion? Do you support? Then the support is much smaller. This is why the bill failed yesterday.
You're creating distinctions only to create doubt, when the point I'm making is, over the last 50 years, generally, overall, should abortion generally be legal in most cases? But support has gone up. You can admit that and still be against it.
No, but David, the problem is the devil is in the details, because I mean, I've got a poll right here that goes into depth on different aspects of abortion polling. That depending on how you depending on how you phrase the question, you get very different answers. So I guess my point is this. According to some of this polling, very few voters and very, very few independent voters support abortion as a top policy issue. It does not seem to motivate a whole lot of people to go to the polls.
Oh, fair. I would agree with that. I agree with that.
So therefore, in that case, if you were advising these candidates, you might say, okay, just keep using the same lines that Democrats have used since Roe versus Wade. But if you were talking about focusing a campaign, I think there are a lot of Democrats right now who say, we're going to run on this. This is going to motivate everyone to go to the polls. Make your campaign about abortion. Would you say that's a good strategy, or would you say, hey, maybe back off a little bit and talk about, I don't know, gas prices?
No. I don't think that's a good strategy. I mean, again, this is less about my opinion, but it's about what the facts show. The facts show that economic issues are far more important when it comes to running national campaigns. So, I mean, no disagreement there. These are just strategy questions. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. There was polling that came out yesterday that showed that on the abortion question, in as much as it does motivate people, it's actually the Roe v. Wade overruling seems to be propelling Republicans at almost 2x the rate as Democrats. So anyway, listen, David, I knew that you would be much more reasonable than Joe Biden. David, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for coming on, though, as always.
Oh my God, it's over. We haven't even talked about anything yet.
We've got, well, I think as I gave you a compliment, but thankfully that's missing too. I think that you've presented a more reasonable view than the White House has. I think you've presented better political advice than the White House has for their own party. And so I appreciate you for coming on.
David should be relieved it's over. Yeah, I mean, to be fair to David, he pulls it a little bit back in the end, but man, what a rough start, middle and late middle for David, for sure. I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on this, though. Do I have it wrong? Am I off base in my opinion here? I just feel like it's loss after loss for David, dude. And David looks like a fool at parts of here. He hit the SERPs point. It's not often we get people that hit the SERPs point. Well, I mean, we get the SERPs, we had BX Bullet, now we have David. Like, it's not often that people hit the SERPs point, but David managed to hit the SERPs point in this conversation. I'm always just happy to see people with opposite beliefs talking to each other. I'm happy about that too, Wiggins, for sure. I do enjoy seeing two people with opposite beliefs. And, you know, for as bad as parts of this went, it's not as bad as it is in other places. It is still an improvement on what we see in the meta of Twitch politics and stuff, right? So it is a little bit better. Looking hella breedable today. Thank you, Moo. Kind of weird, but thank you.